Do that, setting up. All right. Well, thank you all for being here. We are now live on Facebook. If you are just tuning in, feel free to like, share, comment, go ahead and share the stream with your friends, call them up, say, hey, you're missing this, it's lunchtime. You know, I just heard this is not cool to do anymore, by the way. This is like the old person's phone and is it this? This, yeah. So anyway, welcome everyone. I'm Caroline Klibanoff. I am with Made by Us, and I'm excited to share with you this great panel we have today for a conversation on transforming the American table. So I'm going to go ahead and do some introductions, and then I'll share a little bit about what brings us all together, and we'll dive right in. So first of all, hi, I'm Caroline. I'm with Made by Us, and we are a coalition of over 100 museums and historic sites across the country that are working together to engage the next generation in history as a tool for civic engagement. So we know that knowing the past is critical to shaping the future. And if you are a young person today, you're probably already engaged in writing the next chapter of US history. Made by Us is here for you to help you do that. We want to give you access to all of these great museums, all of the context, the critical information you need to know for your active citizenship. So be sure to check us out at historymadebyus.org, or you can follow us at historymadebyus. But I am joined by some really amazing guests today for a conversation that I can't wait to have. First of all, we have our guest, Andrew Zimmern. Andrew Zimmern is an Emmy and 4-time James Beard Award-winning TV personality, chef, writer, teacher, and social justice advocate. He probably needs no introduction, but as the creator, executive producer, and the host of Travel Channel's Bizarre Foods franchise, Andrew Zimmern's Driven by Food, and the Emmy Award-winning The Zimmern List, he has devoted his life to exploring and promoting cultural acceptance, tolerance, and understanding through food. And he has a very exciting new show on the Magnolia channel that we'll share a little bit about during our talk today. So welcome, Andrew. I am also joined by 2 curators from the Smithsonian's National Museum of American History. Steve Velasquez is a curator for the Division of Cultural and Community Life at the museum. His research includes Latinx history and identity, material culture, foodways, and immigration and migration history. He was co-curator for Food, Transforming the American Table, 1950 to 2000, which is where we get the name of today's program, and of Many Voices, One Nation. He is currently involved in the exhibition Entertaining America and a research project on Mexican vineyard workers in Napa and a future exhibit on lowriders. So I already have 10,000 questions for you, Steve. His past projects include the Bracero Oral History Project, a traveling exhibit, Bittersweet Harvest, Mexican Treasures at the Smithsonian, Azucar, The Life and Music of Celia Cruz, A Collector's Vision of Puerto Rico, Julia Child's Kitchen at the Smithsonian, and many other exhibits and special projects. We are also joined by Dr. Ashley Rose Young. She is a historian of American Food History Project at the National Museum of American History. She's the host and historian of Cooking Up History, the museum's cooking demonstration series, and she's curated the museum's main food history exhibition, Transforming the American Table. Ashley is working on her first academic book about the history of street food in New Orleans. So if you aren't hungry yet, just talk to Ashley for 5 minutes and you will have quite an appetite. She's working on this book about how power operated in unexpected ways through the networks of exchange that fed the city. And so we're delighted to have you all here today. I know this was a mouthful for me, but you all have done just amazing work across the spectrum of food, eating, how we eat, what it means. And so I am so excited to get into this conversation with you all.
Happy to be here.
Good. So we'll get started. As a reminder, if you're streaming this, you can ask us questions. This is interactive. So feel free to add a question in the comments, and we will work it into the conversation. So we want to hear from you. So I just as we're getting started here, I mean, it's a huge topic we have on the books for us all today. Let's just acknowledge that. Transforming the American table, 1950 to 2000. 2000 obviously feels for some of us like it was yesterday as well. So as we're thinking about food systems, all that entails, my first question, I'm going to go to you, Andrew, first, is as you think about food systems, what is even just one of the biggest changes you've seen that you would say has transformed the American table in the last 50 years?
Well, thanks, Caroline. And I just want to acknowledge the incredible work that your organization does and the incredible work that Steve and Ashley do. It's just such a thrill to be sitting here talking to the three of you. This is the kind of thing that's on my bucket list. I read and devour. I learn my stuff from all of you people. So I feel like I'm the kid at the little table at Thanksgiving. So it's really exciting for me, and I can't wait to learn from everyone today. But I will say, and I mean no disrespect by this, I believe I'm the only person that has been alive for most of the last 70 years. So graybeard notwithstanding, I'm 59 years old. So I grew up in the 60s. I was around for so many transformations in American culture when it comes to food, because we've had so many just over the course of my lifetime. And I would have to say probably the biggest change, and I'm sure I'm forgetting something more major, but would have to be the velocity and the immediacy of our food system. And what I mean by that is we are a want what I want and I want it now culture. And I think that we have designed a food system to speed animals through it, to put tomatoes on our plate 12 months a year. Everything is fast now, give me, gotta have it, right up to the delivery boom of the pandemic. We have seen a transformation of our food system from when I was a young man in the 60s, where the only tomato that was available in supermarkets in the 60s in the middle of winter was what we called orange tennis balls from Florida, because they didn't have the science to turn them red, right? So we avoided them. And my parents actively, because we grew a garden in the summer and we were in New York City, so it was, you just didn't eat tomato, used canned tomatoes for different things, but the joy of that first summer tomato that got trucked up from a southern state in June-ish was transformative, right? Now we have tomatoes in our face all the time. So I think the immediacy, the speed, and a lot of that I think has been very destructive to our culture. It's been destructive to our health and wellness. I think it's been destructive for the farmer, for the immigrant. I mean, it touches a lot of civic and political issues for me. But I think that speed, velocity, probably the biggest one for me. Number two is size. Everything has become supersized, even our refrigerators, which I think has contributed to an increase in wasted food in America. So those are the two big things. Speed and size seems to be America's problem in a lot of areas.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And the velocity is really interesting. I think sometimes that gets conflated as an American value, speed, newness. And I know our historians could speak to that. So what say you, Ashley?
I've been thinking so much about how our food system has changed since around 1950. And that's because I'm in the midst of writing my academic book right now, which really looks at what New Orleans food economy was from 1800 to 1950 and where we come from versus where we are today in this incredibly globalized, industrialized, hyper-fast world of food, which Andrew, as you pointed out, has provided convenience to some, but at the detriment and to the creation of food apartheids and the creation of food insecurity for so many. And so I'm really interested in where we came from. What did it look like, say in 1880 or in 1830, 1920? And when I look at New Orleans, what I see with its history, and it's a case study of a larger framework for the United States, is that food systems yes, were influenced by global trade at that time. We can't deny that, but they were deeply local. Food growers, food vendors, customers lived within a few blocks of each other in New Orleans, and they procured their food at municipally run and regulated food markets. These are kind of places that look like pavilions that you might see at a farmer's market today, but in New Orleans, it was legal only to buy fresh produce and fresh meat in those places. You didn't have grocery stores where you could go and buy dry goods like flour alongside meat. This is specific to New Orleans, but what it really shows is that the local government had a very strong role in regulating our food consumption. It showed that there was a priority of providing jobs and fresh food and safe food to community members in particular neighborhoods. I mean, New Orleans had 34 public neighborhood markets. So this was a very localized system. And what you see is that there were ways for people, regardless of their socioeconomic status, to access food because of these municipal markets and street vendors. But then we see in the post-war period after 1950 that those municipal markets were abandoned by the city government of New Orleans, and you see the rise of chain grocery stores who at first were providing convenience, providing food, but when they were in communities that didn't provide a large amount of income for them, a large amount of monetary value, they pulled out of those communities, leaving these food apartheids or food deserts that really left communities of color, recent migrants, poor white communities without access to food. So I'm interested in, how do we draw inspiration from the past? What can we learn about what was good 200 years ago, 100 years ago that we might bring back to change things and maybe find a better food future for as many people as possible?
We have a lot of threads to pull on here. I mean, we've heard size, speed, access, labor, regulations, and I know there's even more to unpack there. So as we just get into the conversation about food systems, Steve, what would you add to that list that we're kind of building?
Well, first off, thank you, Caroline, and welcome, Andrew. Yeah, this is such a complex question. I think, it has gotten increasingly global on many different scales and many different levels. Well, I guess first we should back up, this is not something super new. It happened in, like I said, different ways, different levels in the 1890s with transportation and refrigeration, where you are getting all these things. You had migrants coming from different parts of Europe. They were introducing new flavors and new things and new desires and new ways of looking at what they were feeding themselves and their families. So it's not new, but I think the scale in which the globalization now, since the 1950s, I think that has made things a lot more complex. You have not only migrants coming from different parts of the world to the United States, but United States people going other places. You've got different food products coming in from all over the world instantaneously. You have policies that are regulating what comes in, what goes out, what farmers are growing, what farmers are selling, where they're selling to, who they're selling for, and then the workers. I think that's one consistent topic. Workers, especially rural farm workers, their situation hasn't changed much. When you look at policies for the farm worker, they're still kind of the same. They're still fighting for benefits. They're still fighting for good pay. They're still fighting for healthcare. They're still fighting for wages and a voice in the system. And that's been going on for generations, and that part has not changed. And so when I look at the food system, I'm thinking about the farm workers, the factory workers, the restaurant guys in the back, the entrepreneurial spirit of the street vendors, all of that across the board you see that through history. Some things have changed, some things haven't. And that's what I kind of like to explore. Where we can pick off, like Ashley said, where we can pick up what has worked in the past, what's working today, what's not working today. So yeah.
Yeah, I have so many questions that I want to get to, like when you were thinking about this, and Ashley pointed out the community practices of eating and access to food. Just a quick question, and then I have more, but a quick question for Steve and Ashley. Has regulation and policy ever come first, or is it always lagging behind what sort of the people are doing for themselves in terms of figuring out how to get food, what the trends are? Is it always a delay?
I think if anything, what it shows is that grassroots activism within communities is really the trigger for large scale policy change. And there is a story of resilience, a story of innovation, a story of determination throughout US history, where you see these major policy shifts. They're not coming from higher ups. Yes, they're enacted by higher ups, but it is people on the ground working, sweating, getting out there, trying to support their community members to get them a better way of life. It's everyday people, our community activists who are making the change. And we see that today. During 2020 Food History Weekend, we had several panels where we brought together community activists across the country who are addressing issues with COVID-19, who are addressing systemic and historic issues with food apartheids and food deserts. We are living this history right now, and it's not top down, it is bottom up. It is the people who are making these changes, and they're the ones who are lobbying for change. And I find that very inspiring, and something that we do need to keep in mind, that it's only delayed because the people who are actually leading the movement are the people who are on the ground living their lives and fighting for a better life.
Yeah, it's a great point.
I know you've talked to some of our community activists during Food History Weekend. I'm thinking about, the panel on a better deal for food workers, and just some of the themes we've seen in our research together over the years.
I have to say, before Steve tackles this, I think we have to give a tip of the cap to those in the food media who have told these stories and brought what's actually happening in the plants, in the fields, in the picking rooms, and on the boats, in the chicken refrigerators, and brought those images and those stories of those workers into people's living rooms. It's the thing that I was proudest of with our MSNBC series, What's Eating America. We were able in one episode to take people into all those places and actually hear from those folks who have been underrepresented, marginalized, and been fighting for the same basic rights that we afford so many other groups for generations and generations. I think that speaks to the 400-year, history of slavery in this country. Our agricultural foundation of this nation was actually built on the backs of free labor, a horrific story, but you can't sort of separate that out. We still see that behavior. We still see those expectations in those not in the plants, in the fields and on the farms and in the boats of their food system, right? Which is why we have artificially depressed prices. And I think one of the big changes over the last 50 years have been the types of stories that food media has been telling. I'm not a fan of cooking competition shows that are frilly and meaningless. It's a very nice entertainment. I've been on them. I make some of them. So maybe I'm the problem and the solution, but I try to make up for it, right, by telling stories that I think have great meaning and are of help to people. Sorry, go ahead, Steve.
Oh, no, that's exactly right. It's you do see this shift in how people are talking about migrant workers, for example. But again, in the progressive era, the 19 teens, right? People are advocating and that trying to give voice to those people who are voiceless, right? The working class, the poor. Well-meaning, well-intentioned. Sometimes it worked out, sometimes it didn't. Sometimes it was not culturally appropriate. Sometimes it wasn't the right fit for some of these groups. And so I think it's very important to kind of look at all of these different angles when we're talking about trying to improve our communities and trying to make this food system that we live in a little bit more just and equitable. And right, farm workers for generations have been rising up and kind of shaking their making noise, saying this is not right, this is not right. And many activists have been helping that, and it's still ongoing, right? It's still ongoing.
It's a really good point. And I think one of the things, as we were discussing doing this panel and having this conversation, that came up for me was thinking about the idea of a food system. What you just pointed out, Andrew, that even the media has played a role. Of course, you think of labor and policymakers as each playing a role. But we each all play a role, honestly, at the grocery store, in what we eat, in our food practices. And so this idea that there is there's things that have transformed the American table. It's us. We have transformed the American table. The people are what transforms that. So in your work, Andrew, as you're, this summer, you're launching Family Dinner, which it will be on the Magnolia Network, and which takes you to different people's homes. What are you hearing at the family dinner table that reflects some of the changes that you've seen? I mean, what are people saying at that point that is important to them, at the point that they're already sitting down for dinner? What are the concerns on their mind around food and eating?
There is a new desire for togetherness. There is a new desire for slowing down. There is a new desire for really sharing life with each other. We shot this show during all of the pandemic. We were able to do so very safely, and the type of show that we were doing actually lent itself to quarantine families, quarantining crew, bringing them together, because we're shooting literally in a home with anywhere from 3 to 15 family members. So it was an environment that we could control, and it didn't matter where the family was from, what their roots were. We heard the same thing from everybody, and I think it was the impact of the pandemic that had changed their attitudes. And this is from 80-year-old grandmothers down to 17-year-olds that were homeschooling at that point. Everybody sort of started out the year saying, well, I'm locked in the house with my family, that's the worst thing that could possibly happen. To then realizing that when this is all over, to ignore the power of going back 100 years, taking meals together, sharing real life together, spending more time together without electronics being present, growing our own food, eating more locally, eating more seasonally. Because you have to remember, in the early days of the pandemic, with the food shortages and all the rest of that, so many people were cooking at home. I mean, I know it's a cliche to say, but the fact that we now have 20 million more sourdough bread bakers in America than we had in 2019, I think is an amazing sort of thing. There's something timeless about baking your own bread at home. To me, as cute as an example as it is, and I really hasten to have a stat, make the game, so to speak, right? I mean, games make the stats, so we'll know in 10 years the impact of that. But I think people slowing down and realizing, my gosh, we never got together. I mean, we spent, I think of the 20 families that we shot with, well, actually 22 technically, universally, all of them said, we had forgotten the power of being together, and our family always did it every Sunday night or every Wednesday night. Everyone would get together. We sort of had to force ourselves to do it, and we can't do that anymore. We need to be with the people we love, spend more time over food. And the power of creating that together and passing on recipes was almost, if you squinted, sort of like literally stepping back 100 years to what was going on in this country before World War II. And it's fascinating to me. I hope I'm alive to see it. How much of that actually plays if we just discard that in another 6 months and we just speed up the velocity again, everyone goes back to soccer practice and dad works till 8 o'clock at home and everyone comes back into the house and turns on their device and doesn't talk on the couch. I certainly hope that doesn't happen. I also think that a lot of that time that these families have spent together over the last year, especially as we were shooting with them, people became so much more educated. Obviously, our topic was food with everyone and their own food stories. So they were talking to me about food. But the opportunity that they had, we were with a Russian family in central Minnesota on a farm, extremely rural, nearest neighbor is 10 miles down the road kind of thing. Family has 8 children or 9 children, I believe. That goes back to an ancient practice where your family was your workforce, your army, your everything, right? And the number of things that they were able to teach the kids, the mom and dad, and the older siblings able to teach the younger kids about farming, about cooking, about caring for plants, about pickling, about baking. It was incredible. I was really, really, really impressed. So I think, sociologically, there are going to be some silver linings that came out of this horrific year. And I hope that some of it is an appreciation for what we've missed over the last 50 years and what we could add sort of back in. I'm amazed at the New Orleans pavilion food purchasing story, only because, as you said it, I started ticking off countries in my head where that's actually how they do it now, and how healthy the food is, and how the multi-generational housing and the smaller refrigerators and markets on every corner actually are of tremendous benefit to the culture, economically, healthcare wise, and on down the line. We all know what the power of fresh food from a healthcare perspective is, and we all know the cost of bad food from a healthcare perspective is, and we're spending $1.5 trillion every year in America on the big 4 food-related illnesses. That's not the case in Guatemala, Vietnam, just to pick 2 countries on opposite sides of our planet, where they're still shopping for breakfast in the evening and shopping for dinner in the morning at the pavilion on the corner where they get all their goods, with little tiny refrigerators just to store a few perishables that can't be exposed to the temperature. I find it absolutely amazing. And I just hope we're able to retain some of the life lessons that we've learned over the last year and have some gratitude for that. And to Steve's point, improving the lives of everyone in this country. I mean, the late great Senator Paul Wellstone from Minnesota, who was my mentor and got me involved civically when I moved here almost 30 years ago, used to say, we all win when we all win. And I think we really, I think the average American who's not aware of the issue would be stunned at the positive net outcomes that would happen from having some true equality just in our food system with the people who put the food on our plate, whether they plant it, pick it, or cook it. That is a ton of money that would be injected into the arm of our economy. It would improve health and wellness in this country. We'd save trillions of dollars a year. The effect would be radical. And yet, just like, minimum miles per gallon standards in automobiles, while we have the skill to do it, we don't have the political will to change it.
It's a really great point. And, that may change. We've seen a lot of interest in the younger generation, the next generation, Gen Z, in some of these shifts. And Ashley and I had a great conversation last fall, actually, about food justice with Food Forward, a group of activists around food. So we'll be sure the link is in the comments if anyone wants to check that out afterwards. But your comments, Andrew, it's really interesting thinking about this kind of return to cooking more meals at home. Certainly, I feel like someone is always cooking when I'm on a call. Like, really, you want to grind coffee beans and do the loud sizzling right now. But that aside, that return to being at home, cooking more meals. Steve, I'm curious how that maps in different sort of immigrant communities and communities where there is like maybe, I don't know, you can tell me, more traditional food ways that are less that are more family dinner style, as Andrew has just described.
That's an interesting question. You know, like I said, one of the changes has been this kind of increased global global menu that we see, and global different global practices of how we eat, and which is kind of what we explore in our exhibit, Food Transforming the American Table. And in it, there's this section that Ashley and I worked on, where we talk about different immigrant and migrant groups that come and what they bring to the table, right? There's lots of different uh, ways that immigrant families connect to food and to the United States. But we explore kind of three. We explore kind of the restaurant side, right? Because immigrants are coming here, they're showcasing their food and their traditions and their histories through food. We have one local restaurateur who likes to call himself he's the ambassador for Ethiopian food, and he showcases his food for this, for the locally, globally. Um, and so, that's one side, right? The restaurant side. There's a business, the other business side, supermarkets, entrepreneurs who are marketing, selling. They're feeding their clientele. They're bringing in these products, finding alternative products that are similar, and they're opening this gate for other Americans to come and explore that way. And then you have the family stories who are bringing these ideas of what they eat, their roots, their meals, their memories, their traditions together in the family, and then they're talking to their neighbors, they're inviting their neighbors over for that rice dish, or for that stew, and they're showing their appreciation for um, their country that they're coming from, and showing appreciation for the country they're living in now. Um, and they're doing that through food, right? And so um, uh, I think that's one way that this transformation has happened here in the United States in the past 50 years.
It's really interesting. Ashley, are there moments that you can think of that have seen this kind of similar, I don't want to call it a regression because I think it's quite a positive trend, but this sort of shift in the way we eat and communicate, and literally at the table at home, the practices of dining and eating?
That's a great question. Excuse me. And maybe not necessarily with the home table, but I did want to mention, because we're in the pandemic right now, we've been thinking a lot about how our ways of eating have changed because of these combined crises of the pandemic, of systemic racial issues coming even more so to the fore of our minds, really looking at and examining our food systems, our economic systems, our cultural systems. And so I've been asked by reporters and just community members, what are some examples of the past where there have been similar disruptions or crises that have changed how and what we eat? And so, I do look back to World War II, for example, when so much of our effort as a country was geared towards sustaining soldiers and allies abroad, where we had to make major changes to our home economy to survive. And there was the efforts with the gardening campaigns, victory gardens, to really ask Americans to, plant at home, to return to self-sufficiency when as a nation, we really had to practice sacrifice, self-sacrifice to support this greater cause. And you see people returning to more and more to canning practices, to home gardening practices, to food drives, to create, we even in New Orleans, they started resurrecting really antiquated, old-fashioned models of these curbside markets, kind of like the farmers markets we have today, where they invited farmers who really they lost direct access to many Americans by the 1940s. Community activists, women shoppers invited them back to the city and said, we're working with the local government. We're setting up a market twice a week where we want you to come and directly sell your produce to the American people, because there are food shortages because of the way our system is working, but there is an abundance of food. So let's get you in contact with many people living in the city, from people working in factories to some of the elite wealthy community members. Everyone was struggling to get access to food. And so when they opened those curbside markets, people rushed from all over the city to just get fresh produce from local food vendors. And so I feel like in that sense, we're experiencing some of that today, where we want to get back to, who is growing my food? Can I build trust with them to know that there'll be food for me and my family when I need it? And will that be accessible and fresh and affordable? So that's just one example that I wanted to point out, that history repeats itself. And the same insecurities, food insecurities that plagued many Americans in the 1940s or 1840s are issues that still exist today.
I mean, at one point, I sort of time traveled while you were talking about all of those solutions, all those things, canning, pickling, preserving, multi-generational households living together, victory gardens. I mean, that's the stuff that we have learned over the last year are solutions, right? And people who you would never expect to pick up that tool, right, have now put that into place in their lives. What they choose to do with that is now the big question about the future. But those are the solutions on a micro level to solving some of our food justice problems and a lot of the other problems that plague our food system. I get asked all the time, what's one thing that I could do right now today, right, to change the food system around me? And there's all the obvious stuff that a lot of people are doing already, like recycling, which 50 years ago nobody did, right? And we create these huge landfills. And sometimes it takes 25 years for a social justice initiative to take shape, right? That's how long it took to put labels on cigarette boxes, or to get people to start wearing their seatbelts instead of, when I was a kid, shoving them in between the crack where the seat top and bottom met. But you're seeing a lot of velocity actually being our friend here, in that the information that's being that's going into the average home in America, grow your own vegetables, pickle and preserve. Here's how you can, I mean, my gosh, one of the craziest things I ever saw was that, viral social media thing of stick a scallion in a little, glass of water with a toothpick and grow yourself an onion. I mean, it was just like, it was insane. And I was like, these are little tricks as a chef I used to do with my kid, because, in restaurants, there'd be an onion at the bottom of the bag, and you'd go in, it would kind of be forgotten, or, go behind a laundry pit. You'd find it during your monthly cleaning. It would have like a 14-inch sprout coming out of it. And, those things are just absolutely amazing. It's more than just putting an avocado pit in water. We can take all this incredible wisdom, and push it forward and reclaim the things that are healthy and beneficial to us. And I think that's really magical.
It's a great point. And that is the question everyone always asks, what can I do today? And just a reminder, if you're watching, you can ask your questions that you have for this group in the comments, and we will get to them. I mean, a question I have for all three of you, as we think about, again, a food system is so evident when I speak to you three. It may not feel evident to every American all the time at the point that they're shopping or they're eating. What is a question that for each of you, what's one question we should ask ourselves in regards to food that would help us see the system that's around us? Like, what is one question we can ask that would help us think about this as bigger than just, me eating or me buying or me shopping at the farmer's market. And we'll start with you, Andrew.
Where is that from?
It's a good one.
It's the no-brainer of no-brainers. I tell people almost every day, if you're shopping for food and no one can tell you where it's from, something is wrong. Now, that could be a shelf talker. It doesn't have to be a human being. It could be a well-designed label from a producer, right? I mean, Bob's Mill has hundreds of fantastic products. They have they pay their workers better. They have a transparent system. It's a natural and organic line. They have all kinds of amazing products that come out of Bob's Mill, right? And just right there on the label, you read it and you're like, okay, yeah, I know this is 50 cents more a pound, their flour, their flax, their, cornstarch, whatever it is. However, you feel good about using it, right? And that goes down to vegetables. I know it's anathema to a lot of people, and I don't want to get into the carbon footprint side of this thing, as important a discussion as that is. But even some of those little stickers on plums tell a story. What you choose to do with it is different. If you choose not to buy that plum from South America or Central America because of its carbon footprint, you should investigate what's appropriate and what isn't and make a decision for yourself. But at least you have the information. It galls me when we're buying meat, produce, fish, poultry from places that we don't know how it's been raised, where it's from, how they treat their workers, right? I mean, we have signs I have friends who won't go to certain stores or chains because of the political contributions of the chain's ownership into organizations that they don't believe in, right? And those same people won't do the same work when they're buying spinach. And I think we need to change that. And in fact, in our immigration issue, we show different types of stickers that are now being used on a lot of produce that comes out of the Salinas Valley, and hopefully it will spread across America, that tells you that their workers were paid differently, get health insurance, have a share in equity in what they're doing. And I support those initiatives. And I think that those are the little things that are slowly but surely changing our system. But definitely ask where your food's from.
It's a great one. Steve, what would you add?
Yeah, that I have to say that is a good one. That was my first that was my first question.
It's like Family Feud, Steve. It's everyone's first one. Carolyn threw me the softball. I apologize. I felt bad answering it.
Let's see. Is that the best choice? I guess, does that answer your question? Is that the best choice for me, for you, for us?
It's a good one.
And just to play devil's advocate here a little bit, I mean, if you, we have to be very careful how we talk about this, because there are communities out there that may not be able to look at that bag of spinach and make those decisions, right? They can't, financial reasons, health, whatever it is.
Steve,
so
can you talk about that for a second? Because I think you went from maybe to a definitively, and I happen to believe very strongly with what I know you're able to say a lot more eloquently than I can. There are 3 food Americas that exist right now, and not everybody has the power of choice in their life, even about whether they eat or don't eat. Forget about whether they can look at 2 different kinds of spinach, right? So if you could talk about that, I think that's super, super important. And I know we're on a 1-sentence advice question, but eating well in America, and sometimes eating at all, is a class issue. And it would be great to have one of you guys address that.
Yeah, I mean, I'll start it, and Ashley, I know, has thoughts about it too. Because answering this question, I mean, there are urban Americans who cannot They don't have this access. They can't afford to worry about this thing, where their spinach comes from. They only have one choice, perhaps. Sometimes they don't have any choice. Rural Americans, the same thing. They may not. They may have only one place to find some of these products, and they're stuck with what they can get. Um, and so it's uh, a hard um, decision to make when you have to feed a family. And you see this also in the past, in the 1900s. They had to choose between feeding or rent, and it's they couldn't take the advice of these progressive era reforms that people were trying to get them to eat healthy, or use their money more wisely. We have to be culturally competent in how we're talking about these things. And as much as I would love for everybody to be able to have a choice and have that nutrition, it's not equal quite yet, at all. And so I think we have to be very careful in how and what we're urging, and
Well
talking
said.
about.
Ashley, anything to add there?
I mean, I think for those, I'm trying to think here. I'm trying to contextualize it within a historical context too. But I'm thinking, taking a step back, and we've mentioned the kind of global industrialization of our food systems. I think about the means of production and the separation from the means of production, thinking back to Marx when I read a Wikipedia page about him 5 years ago. But there's this idea that food ends up on our plate if we have the privilege of even having food on a regular basis. But there are so many steps between having that tomato, or having that piece of chicken, or having that granola bar, whatever it could be, between it arriving on your plate and where it came from. So these questions of where did it come from, who made it, are so key. But I keep thinking about what my vision for a more equitable food future would be. And I really do think that it's drawing inspiration from what community activists are doing now, is to go back to that local system where it's not such a difficult, burdensome process to figure out where your food came from, and who grew it, who brought it to you, who sold it to you. If we get back to a world in which we are supporting our local economies because we're employing local farmers, we're employing local grocers, local street vendors, and they have fair and equitable wages, you're going to be able to build a relationship with that person over time. You'll actually know your vendor because of the smaller scale, the localized scale of food distribution. And so, and that builds on equity too, because when you're putting money back into the local economy by supporting local vendors and local growers, it's going to make the entire community all the more stable and richer for it, both metaphorically and in terms of actual money as well. So I feel like I'm just looking to a food future when access is just a given. When fair access is a given, and knowing your local vendor, knowing your local farmer is a given. We're not there yet. We're not going to be there for a long time, but we were there once. And that's not to say that the past didn't have its issues with food security either, but there was a system, I think, that was more sustainable. I think we're running our course now with this hyper-globalized, industrialized economy that has a dark side, environmentally, socially, culturally, economically, and we have to come to terms with that, and we have to make serious decisions to even sustainably live on this planet as a species, let alone on a community level.
So that actually, there's a question in the comments that ties. So I'm just going to throw it back to you, so you have this question in mind. Someone has asked, do you think our global interconnectedness is an overall boon or bane for food security? Given the move towards slow food and buying local, is there a place for the global in food systems?
Absolutely there is. And there's a place for big food too, because big food has the ability to feed the billions of people that we need to feed. They have the infrastructure, they have the production, they have the distribution. It's just how we do it. we're not taking advantage of what history has taught us, right? So both Steve and especially Ashley have both in the last 20 minutes several times referenced or used the phrase 100 years ago, right? So that was the era of Upton Sinclair's The Jungle, right? And in many cases, and that book, by the way, was referenced a lot last March and April and May when what was happening to food workers in this country. I talked about it in What's Eating America pre-COVID. I mean, I was stunned at some of the conditions that we saw at the Tyson chicken plant in Springdale, Arkansas, or out in the Salinas Valley, with how workers were treated more fairly in the fields than I anticipated, but were crammed 8 to a room with bunk beds in a motel by the side of the road, ironically called the John Steinbeck Motel, because that's where the town that he was born in. But we don't need to, it's not an all or nothing situation. We don't need to take the bad with the good. We're smarter than that. This is the 21st century in the world. And I believe that with the right kind of leadership that has the political will to do it, sadly, and Ashley, said, picked some time in the future when things might correct themselves. That time is now. My friend Alexandra Cousteau has a Oceans 2050 initiative, but she fully admits and talks about this all the time, that if we don't correct the problems by 2030, there is no Oceans 2050. We will have killed off too much of our ocean to ever reclaim it back again. There's some things we can change. There's some things that once they're gone can never be replaced. That's just the science of it. So there's no better time than right now to get civically engaged in food justice so that we can change the laws at the municipal, state, and federal levels to allow us all to have one food America. As Steve was saying, so many people have been left out of this equation. We must have legal standing to include everyone. It shouldn't be a privilege as to whether or not your child eats tonight. That's not the country that I want to live in. I don't think it's the country that our founding fathers envisioned, despite the fact that they had a lot of unfair practices and did a lot of things that today we find repugnant. From a philosophical level, I do believe that they believed in a better life for all Americans. Who they classified as Americans was different. We now classify Americans much differently. We have to ensure that we have a better America for all of them, especially when it comes to food justice. It affects economic development. It affects international trade. It affects health and wellness in this country. It affects our climate crisis. Food is the best place to start these conversations. And we have to get involved civically, and we have to get involved politically to make these changes fast. Otherwise, as anyone will tell you, it will be too late.
Mm-hmm. Definitely.
Well said.
And I was thinking about globalization and thinking about what Andrew just drew upon here. Globalization, we can't divorce ourselves from it. So as I'm advocating for local, I see it as something that's paired with a larger system. So instead of having broken where local isn't really in conversation with national or global, that we can kind of fix those communication systems and have things working with each other. And global, think about what we've done in the past year to create several vaccines during COVID-19, a global effort with scientists across the world focusing solely on tackling this one issue. Imagine if we could have that brain power, that economic backing to tackle our food system issues locally, nationally, globally. We could really start to affect change, but there are so many issues impacting communities across the globe that how do we get everyone focusing on just one thing? I don't want to ask for the impossible, but I do think global initiatives are so key. And, I just kind of to draw back to the initial question, it's related to globalization, but not in some ways. But since 1965, if we're looking at movements or themes that have changed the American table, migration, migration within countries, migration internationally has played such a huge role in changing the way we eat in the United States. The 1965 immigration laws that, prior to it just systemically prevented people from certain continents and countries from coming to the US, when we redefine those immigration laws in 1965, you start to see migrants coming from Africa, coming from Southeast Asia in larger numbers, coming from the Middle East to the United States, and communities pouring into urban and rural areas across the United States. Steve and I did a project about the migrant community in Lincoln, Nebraska, an incredibly vibrant community with, with refugee resettlement since the 1970s, bringing communities from all, 5, 6 continents to Lincoln, Nebraska. And we're looking at that landscape. The tapestry of the food culture there is incredibly vibrant, and the community activism through food and through entrepreneurship is inspiring. And so it's not just a New York City, it's not just a Chicago or even a Houston, where you have these mass movements of people from across the globe coming into the United States, but also in smaller communities. Migration has defined this nation from its founding. And since 1965, it has transformed the American foodscape for the better because of all the diverse influences that are coming into our country, in which, as we move forward as a country, hopefully moving away from some people's tendencies towards xenophobia, which is horrific, to a more inclusive and increasingly inclusive view of what food in America means. And it's not a single culture. There is no American cuisine. We are a country of many, many cultures, and that's the strength of our community.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the reasons Made by Us is this coalition of over 100 history sites and history organizations across the country is because there's no one institution, not even this Smithsonian institution, that can tell the full, complete history of the United States. Communities do a lot of that work on their own. And so one thing I'll just share, as Ashley, you said, is it too much to ask? Well, we have a program coming this summer I just wanted to introduce as a way that may have tie-ins to what we're all talking about today. Made by Us is going to launch with our friends at Civics Unplugged a civic season between Juneteenth and the 4th of July that invites everyone to dig in. Like, we know we are caught between the promise and the practice of democracy. We all have a role to play. And as you've each said in your comments, no matter what your skills are, you don't have to be you don't have to be a chef, you don't have to necessarily be a food historian. Whatever your skills are can be used to create a more just food future. And so the civic season is a time to look back in order to look forward. And I think that you cannot divorce that from the way we eat, the way we shop, the way we practice food, the food system in the United States. So we're looking forward for ways to connect that with a larger picture of civic engagement, because no matter what your cause is or your skills are, it has an impact on the food system. As you've all said, it brings in so many different parts of life today in the US and even around the world. So stay tuned for the civic season. And as we wrap up here, I just wanted to ask you each, as people do ask, what is one thing I can do today? And I've asked you, what is one question that people can ask themselves? But as you're walking through the world and you're eating and you're shopping and you're buying and you're thinking about where this food came from and who made it and who has access and who's regulating this stuff, are there any key resources you would point people to start? Is it as simple as your local historical society, or is there any specific places you would point people to understand the context of where we came and where we might go next? And I will start with you, Ashley.
So I would say going on the internet, doing a quick search for a local food justice organization in your community would be key. And take a look at who is part of the organizational structure, who is leading this group. So if it's in a historically Black community, are the members who are leading that organization, who may be looking at food security, do they themselves identify as Black? And are they themselves a part of that community? So, if you have the opportunity and you have the ability to provide money to local organizations, make sure that you are supporting community leaders who are actually involved and of that community and know how best to kind of address issues within the community. So take a look at who makes up these organizations before deciding to donate. And I would say donate and support people who are from communities, who know those communities, and who are looking for support to really make a difference and a change. That would be my suggestion there.
Great. Other thoughts to close us out? Steve, do you want to go?
I'll make a plug for the Smithsonian resources. For those who are interested in those stories of the past and how we got to maybe how we got to where we are today. What are the lessons learned that we can learn from the past? There are many resources at American History across the Smithsonian that talk about food justice, food stories, food and culture, food and traditions. And I think being a person who has helped create some of these pieces that really likes to draw from the past to talk about today. I have to plug the Smithsonian resources as a place to start to think about how we might look at the past to make a better future.
That's great. And we'll share some of those in the comments as well. All right, Andrew, the final word is yours. What do you want to leave us with?
Just to encourage, I agree with Ashley and Steve. I would encourage people to spend a half hour on the internet and do two things. Spend 15 minutes going, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and follow food people, follow food entities, the food pages at your local newspaper, the food pages at New Republic, Daily Beast. I mean, you name it. All of those entities aggregate so much good information. I mean, one of the things that we suffer from is information overload. I subscribe to so many different newsletters. It's almost paralyzing in my head. But if you go to a good local news organization, you gravitate towards their web pages and you start getting their alerts and stuff, you will be linked to so many things. You can find what you believe in. You can narrow down your scope to the stuff that you can activate in your own life, right? If you live in a big high-rise building, it may not be great for you to subscribe to some, farming.com website that, talks about, what to do with your 30 extra hectares of land and whether you're going to plant, oats or rye this year. But find what you can relate to. And then once you've lived in that for 60, 90 days, what's the most important thing, I think as important as what we do with our own dollars, is to be an awareness raiser. I joke around with all my friends. I said, turn into your grandmother when the internet happened. And you remember, my grandmother would send me almost every week this thing about, Neiman Marcus's chocolate chip cookie recipe. And if I could win $100,000 or get $1 million if I passed it on to 10 friends. I mean, like those really crazy days of the early internet. Turn into your grandmother then. Send that information to everyone on your list until you annoy them so much they tell you to stop. Awareness raising is so valuable. There's so many people that just at dinner party, I'm just stunned at how many people are engaged, but also how many people still aren't engaged. And we need those people that aren't engaged to get engaged. We need to stem the tide. And if we're going to do this politically, if we're going to do it civically, if we're going to do it socially, we have to start to engage more people in these ideas. It's great to talk about, weather and sports when we're hanging out with our friends, but try to talk about one big food idea. Anyone who's watching this right now is a food person. They already know there's an issue. They are aligned with us. There may not be complete overlap, but they're aligned. And we need those people to become advocates in their own communities. And if we can do that, if we can energize that, then we have that grassroots movement that both Steve and Ashley had talked about. And I think that's what's really exciting, because then we harness that energy and we can make real substantive change in America's way we look at food, grow food, eat food, treat food people. And then we can have one food America instead of three food Americas, where nobody has to worry about the choice to eat that day.
Fantastic and well said. It's a good challenge as we all go forth to help create a more just food future, and certainly one in which we're all aware of the systems that impact us every day and the history. So thank you all so much for your time. Be sure to check out Family Dinner on Magnolia Network. Be sure to check out the Smithsonian's resources, and of course, follow History Made by Us on your social media platform of your choice. we're sharing things to connect past, present, and future all the time. So tell us what you think. And thanks again to everyone for joining us and for sharing your questions. And thank you, Steve. Thank you, Ashley. And thank you, Andrew, for a really awesome conversation. And
Thank you, Caroline. Thanks, Steve.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks, everyone.